The stagecoach lurched violently, nearly overturning as a wheel plunged into a treacherous rut. Eleanor Vance's breath hitched, her heart thundering against her ribs. For one terrifying instant, she believed this was how her new life would begin and end, tossed into the unforgiving dust of a land she had never seen. Clutching the worn leather strap, she forced herself to inhale. Beyond the grimy window, the vast plains of Wyoming stretched endlessly, wide and desolate, as if they had swallowed the familiar world of Kentucky she once knew. She had been traveling for 5 long days. 5 days of bone-jarring roads, frigid nights, and persistent, quiet thoughts that offered no peace. Each mile carried her farther from the rolling hills of home, farther from a small town where people had whispered about her future with a pity that stung. At 37, with both parents gone and no land or dowry to her name, Eleanor had learned that hope could be a thin, tattered blanket in a harsh world. Her fingers brushed the folded letter tucked inside her carpetbag. The parchment, soft at the edges, bore the creases of being read countless times. She didn't need to read it again. Every word was etched into her memory. Asterisk Silas Croft seeks diligent woman for matrimony. Ranch established. Children welcome. Methodist preferred. Asterisk, there had been nothing tender in those words. No promises of love or laughter, only stark necessity, duty, survival, and need. But Eleanor wasn't searching for poetry. She was searching for a place to belong. Across from her, an older pioneer woman sat stiff and silent, her gnarled hands clasped around a small, leather-bound devotional. A circuit preacher, lost in slumber, snored softly in the corner, his saddlebag resting on his chest. The stagecoach groaned and creaked like an aging beast, forced onward long after its spirit should have rested. When the driver finally halted the team near a shallow watering hole, Eleanor stepped down onto the prairie. The air carried the dry scent of sagebrush and distant rain. She lifted her face toward the immense sky, spotting dark clouds gathering far off on the horizon. "How much farther to Shadow Ridge?" she asked the driver quietly. He spat into the dust and shrugged. "Another day, maybe a day and a half, if the weather holds." She nodded, swallowing the sudden tightness in her throat. She had exactly $5 left in her small purse, enough for a few meals, certainly not enough to turn back. This journey wasn't just a choice. It was her only chance. By late afternoon, thunder rumbled low across the vast plains. The horses grew restless. Rain, sharp and heavy, fell without warning, drumming against the coach roof like thrown stones. The trail quickly became slick and treacherous. Wheels skidded. The entire carriage leaned precariously to one side. "Hold on," the driver yelled. Eleanor pressed her eyes shut and whispered a prayer. The stage swayed again, but, miraculously, did not fall. Somehow, the horses dragged the coach forward through thick mud and howling wind until, at last, a faint cluster of lights appeared in the distance. They reached a small frontier way station just before full dark. Eleanor rushed inside with the other passengers, her simple calico dress soaked and clinging to her skin. The grizzled store owner shook his head when the driver inquired about repairs. "Axle's cracked. Can't fix that in this weather. 2 days at least." 2 days. Eleanor felt her stomach clench. Would Silas think she had changed her mind? Would he assume she never intended to come? That night, she slept on the hard wooden floor, her carpetbag serving as a meager pillow. The older woman whispered prayers into the darkness. Wind howled outside, rattling the thin walls. Eleanor stared up at the ceiling, trying to picture Starfire Mesa Ranch. She imagined a wide porch, sturdy fences, perhaps a small herb garden. She imagined a man waiting. In the morning, the storm had passed. The prairie looked freshly washed and vibrant beneath a brilliant sky. Eleanor assisted the store owner's wife with cooking and cleaning in exchange for her meals while they waited for repairs. She worked tirelessly, without a single complaint. She had learned long ago that tears did not fill empty plates. 3 days later, the stagecoach rolled west again. As they neared their final stop, Eleanor pressed her face to the window, her heart quickening. This was it, the place where she would begin anew. But the coach slowed before a weathered barn and a sturdy log house with smoke curling from its chimney. A tall man stood nearby, his hat casting a shadow over his face. "That must be Silas Croft," Eleanor whispered to herself. "Ironwood Ridge Homestead," the driver called out. Eleanor frowned. "I meant for Starfire Mesa Ranch," she said quickly. "Outside Shadow Ridge," the driver clarified, unfolding his manifest and squinting at the page. "Says here, Ironwood Ridge Homestead for Miss Eleanor Vance." Her breath caught. There must be some mistake. The tall man began walking toward the coach, his stride steady, confident. As he drew near, Eleanor saw he was younger than she expected, perhaps 43. His skin was sun-bronzed, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Ma'am," he said, stopping a few steps away. "I'm Owen Kincaid. This is Ironwood Ridge Homestead. You look like you're searching for someone." "I'm supposed to marry Silas Croft," Eleanor said, clutching her carpet bag tightly. "Estar for the Mesa Ranch." Owen blinked once. "I don't know any Silas Croft, and I certainly didn't send for a bride." His words struck her like a blast of cold water. Behind her, the driver tipped his hat. "Company rules, miss. This is where the manifest says to leave you." "You can't just leave me here," she cried. But he was already climbing back to his seat. The horses lurched forward. Within seconds, the stagecoach was rolling away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in a swirling cloud of red dust. Silence settled heavy around her. She turned slowly to face Owen Kincaid. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The prairie wind moved through the tall grass with a lonely sound. "Well," Owen said at last, removing his hat. "Seems there's been a mix-up. You can't stand out here all evening. Come inside." Every lesson Eleanor had ever been taught told her to refuse. A decent woman did not enter a stranger's home without a chaperone. But the sun was sinking fast, the air already cooling. She had no money, no horse, and no idea where Starfire Mesa might even be. "I suppose I have no choice," she said softly. He nodded once and led her toward the house. Inside, the cabin was simple but meticulously clean. A fire burned warmly in the hearth, and a comforting scent of stew filled the air. Eleanor placed her carpet bag by the door and sat carefully at the table, trying to steady her trembling hands. "Coffee?" Owen asked. "Thank you." Before she could take more than a sip, the front door burst open. A girl of 13 ran inside, her dress hem muddy, her dark hair tied into loose pigtails. "Pa said Buttercup's full, is up and moving. Gus thinks she'll be fine." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Eleanor. Wide brown eyes studied her without fear. "Juniper," Owen said gently. "This is Miss Vance. She's staying for supper." The girl stepped closer, her head tilted slightly. "Are you lost?" Eleanor managed a faint smile. "Yes, sweetheart. I think I am." "Pa finds lost calves all the time," Juniper said seriously. "He always brings them home." Something inside Eleanor's chest tightened. Owen cleared his throat. "Wash up for supper, little bird." When Juniper skipped away, Eleanor looked down at her coffee cup. The warmth from the fire crept into her fingers. For the first time since leaving Kentucky, she didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the small window of the guest room. But for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the scent of bacon and wood smoke brought everything rushing back. A soft knock tapped at the door. "Miss Eleanor," Juniper's clear voice called. "Pa says breakfast is ready." Eleanor rose and quickly braided her hair. When she stepped into the main room, Owen stood at the stove, moving with quiet skill. The table was already set. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." Juniper swung her legs beneath the chair, smiling brightly. "I brushed Whiskers today. She's our barn cat. She likes me best." "I'm sure she does," Eleanor replied kindly. After breakfast, Owen stood and reached for his hat. "Gus is riding to town. I'll have him send telegrams. We'll find this Silas Croft and fix the mistake." "Thank you," Eleanor said. When he left, Juniper grabbed her hand. "Come see the kittens." The barn smelled of hay and horses. In a quiet corner, 5 tiny kittens tumbled over one another while their mother watched. "This one is Snowball," Juniper said proudly. Eleanor knelt beside her, smiling at the small creatures. For a brief moment, she forgot about letters and mistakes and strangers. Then Juniper's voice turned soft. "Do you think my ma can see me from heaven?" Eleanor's heart stilled. "I believe she can," she answered gently. "Sometimes I can't remember her voice," Juniper whispered. "Is that bad?" Eleanor wrapped her arms around the child. "No, sweetheart. Love stays even when memories fade." Juniper rested her head against Eleanor's shoulder. And in that quiet barn, with sunlight spilling through wooden slats and dust motes dancing in the air, Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected to feel on this journey. Not fear, not regret, but the first small spark of belonging. She had been delivered to the wrong ranch. But as Juniper's small hand tightened around hers, Eleanor couldn't help wondering if perhaps she hadn't been lost after all. The days that followed did not feel like days to Eleanor. They felt like borrowed time. Each morning she woke with the same thought pressing heavy against her chest. At any moment, a telegram could arrive. At any moment, someone could say the mistake had been fixed. At any moment, she would have to pack her carpet bag and leave. Owen kept his word. Gus rode into town and sent messages in every direction, to Shadow Ridge, to nearby settlements, even farther north where larger ranches were known to advertise for brides. They waited for answers that did not come. While they waited, life at Ironwood Ridge Homestead went on. Eleanor refused to sit idle. She rose before sunrise and helped with breakfast. She mended shirts that had been worn thin at the elbows. She scrubbed floors, aired bedding, and organized shelves that hadn't been touched since Owen's wife passed. She did not ask about the woman who had lived there before. The house carried her memory in quiet ways, in a lace curtain yellowed by sun, in a chipped teacup, carefully set apart from the others. Juniper followed Eleanor everywhere. She watched her knead dough and asked endless questions, but she sat still while Eleanor braided her hair into neat plaits instead of the loose knots Owen usually managed. She giggled when Eleanor pretended not to notice flour on her nose. Owen observed it all in silence. One afternoon, Eleanor stood at the wash line, pinning damp shirts to the rope when Owen approached from the barn. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She did not look at him. "I would feel useless if I did nothing." "You're not useless." The words were simple, but they warmed her more than the high sun overhead. That evening, Gus returned from town with news. He removed his hat slowly, his expression careful. "I asked at the telegraph office. Nobody's heard of a Silas Croft connected to Starfire Mesa Ranch. Not in this territory." Eleanor felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her. "That can't be right," she whispered. "I have letters." Gus shifted his weight. "Could be a false name. Happens sometimes. Men promise things they never intend to keep." The truth settled heavy and cold. Eleanor excused herself and stepped outside. The prairie stretched wide and endless before her. She had crossed half the country, chasing a man who might never have existed. Owen followed her onto the porch, but kept his distance. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She nodded, staring ahead. "I thought I was careful. I thought I was sensible." "You were brave," he replied. She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Brave women do not arrive at the wrong ranch with $5 and a broken promise. He stepped closer. Brave women do not give up either. That night, Eleanor sat alone at the small table after Juniper had gone to bed. The lamp burned low, but she unfolded the letters one last time and studied the careful handwriting. She searched for clues she might have missed, a smudge, a sign, anything that would prove she had not been foolish. Owen entered quietly and sat across from her. "What will you do?" he asked. She folded the papers neatly. "I do not know." "You can stay," he said at once. She looked up, startled. "You would keep me here?" she asked. "You've done more good in this house in 3 weeks than I've managed in 3 years," he answered. Juniper laughs again. "She sleeps without waking. She talks about you from sunrise to sunset." Eleanor swallowed hard. "And you?" He hesitated. "I forgot what it felt like to have someone share a meal without silence." The fire cracked softly between them. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwood trees, carrying the scent of dry grass and open sky. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, something steady and slow. The next morning, trouble came without warning. A section of fence in the north pasture had given way during the night. Several cattle had slipped through and scattered across the open land. Eleanor heard the shouts before she reached the door. "I'll help," she called, pulling on her boots. "Stay with Juniper," Owen shouted back. But Eleanor was already moving. She mounted Comet, the gentle chestnut gelding Juniper adored, and rode hard across the field. Wind whipped her hair loose from its braid. Dust rose around her like smoke. She spotted a small calf near a dry gully, separated and frightened. Without thinking, she dismounted and approached slowly, murmuring soft words as she had seen Owen do. Behind her, hoofbeats thundered closer. "Eleanor, wait," Owen called. The earth beneath her boots shifted suddenly. The bank crumbled. She slipped forward, grasping at brittle grass as the edge gave way. A strong hand seized her arm. "I've got you," Owen said through clenched teeth. For a breathless moment, both of them hovered at the precipice. Then he pulled her back onto solid ground. They fell into the dust together, breathing hard. "You could have been killed," he said, anger and fear tangled in his voice. "So could you," she answered. He stared at her, and something in his expression changed. He was no longer looking at a stranded stranger. He was looking at a woman who had chosen to stand beside him. "You're stubborn," he muttered. She gave a faint smile. "So are you." When they returned to the house, Juniper ran toward them, tears streaking her cheeks. "Pa, Miss Eleanor, are you hurt?" Owen knelt and hugged her tightly. "We're fine, little bird." Juniper turned to Eleanor and wrapped her arms around her waist. "I prayed," she said earnestly. "I asked God to keep my ma safe." The word hung in the air. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Owen did not correct her. That night, Juniper snuggled close to Eleanor on the settee with her small sewing basket. "Will you stay until the fair?" she asked softly. "I want to show you my ribbons." Eleanor hesitated. "That depends on what we find out." Juniper's lower lip trembled. "You belong here." Owen cleared his throat. "That's not for you to decide, Juniper." The child looked from one to the other, her eyes shining with tears. "Then I'll pray God decides," she said firmly before running to her room. Silence filled the house after she was gone. "She's just a child," Eleanor murmured. "She understands more than we think," Owen replied. Eleanor stared into the fire. "If there's no Silas Croft, if there never was, what am I supposed to do?" He met her gaze steadily. "You start again. You always have." The days turned into weeks. No telegram arrived with good news. Every message confirmed the same truth. No Silas Croft, no Starfire Mesa Ranch connected to his name. Eleanor felt the last thread of her old plan snap quietly inside her. One evening, she stood on the porch beside Owen, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The vast Wyoming sky burned orange and gold. "I came here by mistake," she said softly. "Maybe," he answered. She looked toward the window, where Juniper's silhouette moved against the lamplight. "But it doesn't feel like one anymore." He took a slow breath. Then maybe it wasn't. The prairie stretched endless before them. Wind moved through the tall grass like a whisper. Eleanor felt fear, yes. But beneath it, she felt something stronger. Hope. Not the fragile kind she had carried in a letter, but the steady kind built from shared meals, hard work, and a girl's small hand slipping into hers as if it had always belonged there. And as the first stars appeared in the wide Wyoming sky, Eleanor began to understand that sometimes losing one future makes room for another. The county fair arrived with bright banners, fresh-baked pies, and the sound of laughter drifting across Shadow Ridge. For Juniper, it felt like the biggest day of her life. For Eleanor, it felt like the day everything would finally settle in her heart. They rode into town together in Owen's wagon. Owen held the reins steady. Eleanor sat beside him, her blue dress simple but neat. Juniper bounced in the back, clutching her basket of ribbons and wildflowers like treasure. People turned to look as they passed. Some smiled kindly, others whispered. A widower bringing a young woman to town would always stir talk. Eleanor kept her chin high. She had spent too many years shrinking herself to please others. She would not do it again. At the fairgrounds, Juniper hurried to the children's table, laying out her stitched ribbons with proud hands. Miss Eleanor helped me, she told anyone who would listen. Eleanor felt warmth rise to her cheeks, but she did not step back from the words. She stood behind Juniper, steady and close. When the judge announced the winners, Juniper won second place. Not first, but she clapped her hands as if she had won the whole fair. "Ma helped me," she said clearly, her voice ringing out across the small crowd. This time, Eleanor did not freeze. She looked at Owen. He stood a few steps away, hat tilted low, but she could see his smile, small and certain. He did not correct the child. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in soft gold, they rode home. Juniper fell asleep before they reached the ranch, her head resting against Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor held her carefully, breathing in the scent of sun and grass in the child's hair. Something deep inside her settled in a way it never had before. When they reached the house, Owen lifted Juniper gently from Eleanor's arms and carried her inside. He laid her in bed and returned to the porch where Eleanor stood watching the last light fade. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "She called you Ma," he said at last. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I did not have the heart to tell her otherwise." "Good," he replied quietly. "Because she's right." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Eleanor felt her breath catch. "Owen," she began softly, "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I thought I was walking toward a future that was safe and sensible, and instead I found out it was built on lies." He stepped closer, but not so close that she felt crowded. "And what did you find instead?" he asked. She looked toward the barn, toward the fields, toward the house glowing warm behind them. "I found a child who needed someone to braid her hair and sit beside her at night. I found a man who works harder than anyone I've ever known and still thinks he is not enough. I found a place that feels like home." The prairie wind moved gently around them. "I don't want to leave," she said. Owen's jaw tightened slightly. "You wouldn't have to." Silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. It was full. "I will not be another burden to you," Eleanor added quietly. "You are not a burden," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that has walked through my door in years." Her eyes stung. "And Juniper?" she asked. He looked toward the small window where a soft lamp burned. "She lost her mother too soon," he said. "I have tried to be both father and mother, but there are things I cannot give her. You give them without trying." Eleanor folded her hands in front of her to keep them from trembling. "I cannot take her mother's place," she whispered. "I am not asking you to replace anyone," he said. "I am asking if you will build something new with us." The words were simple, honest, steady. Eleanor felt the fear that had followed her from Kentucky finally loosen its hold. "I would stay," she said slowly, "but not as a guest, not as someone waiting to leave." Owen understood. He removed his hat and held it in his hands. "Then stay as my wife," he said. There was no grand speech, no kneeling in the dirt. Just truth spoken plain. Eleanor's heart pounded. This was not the careful arrangement she had once planned. This was not a letter written in tidy ink. This was a man who had pulled her from the edge of a crumbling bank. A child who had wrapped small arms around her waist and called her Ma without fear. "Yes," she said. The word felt like stepping into sunlight. Owen let out a slow breath he had been holding for weeks. He reached for her hand. This time, she did not hesitate. They were married quietly 2 weeks later in Shadow Ridge. The town preacher stood beneath the wide sky while a handful of neighbors watched. Juniper held a small bouquet of wildflowers and beamed so brightly it seemed she carried her own light. When the preacher finished, Juniper ran forward before anyone else. "Now you really are my Ma," she declared proudly after Eleanor knelt and gathered her into a tight embrace. "Yes," she whispered, "if you will have me." "I already do," Juniper answered. Life at Ironwood Ridge Homestead did not turn easy overnight. The work was still hard. Winters still came sharp and long. Fences still broke and calves still wandered. But the house was different. Laughter filled rooms that once held silence. Supper was shared without loneliness. Juniper slept peacefully, her nightmares fading with each passing month. Eleanor planted a small garden beside the porch. She hung fresh curtains in the kitchen. She sang softly while she worked, filling the air with gentle sound. One evening, months later, Eleanor stood at the edge of the pasture, watching Owen teach Juniper how to toss a rope. The sky above Wyoming stretched wide and endless, painted in shades of pink and blue. She thought back to the moment the stagecoach had rolled away, leaving her alone in a cloud of dust. She had believed her life was over. She had believed she had been foolish. Instead, she had been delivered to the wrong ranch, and that wrong ranch had given her everything she had once prayed for. Owen walked toward her, Juniper running ahead with bright laughter trailing behind. "Pa says I can help with the calves tomorrow," Juniper announced. "We will see about that," Eleanor replied with a smile. Juniper grinned up at her. "Ma always says that." Owen slipped his hand into Eleanor's. The prairie wind moved softly through the grass. Eleanor looked out across the land that no longer felt strange. The land that held her home, her husband, her child. Sometimes the road you choose disappears beneath your feet. Sometimes the letter you trust leads nowhere. But sometimes the wrong destination is the very place you were meant to find. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars shimmered above Ironwood Ridge Homestead, Eleanor knew one simple truth. She had arrived exactly where she belonged.